In a recent video, I demonstrated use of the Office script's fetch function to web scrape CSV data from GitHub. I also showed the size limitations of that method. In this new video, I demo a small project that enables the importation of as many rows of data as you like into Excel Online, as long as the Excel file itself remains smaller than 100 megabytes. My demo shows the importation of two datasets, one of over 300,000 rows and a larger one of 2.7 million rows. Excel Online does not have, at this time, a functioning data menu. That is, we cannot import data. So using Power Automate, Azure Data Factory and Excel Office scripts, I will show you how you can bypass that lack of functionality and build your own data importing solution. Microsoft is, as we speak, building and releasing at various stages that importing functionality. Here I've put a list of the learning points that you can get from this video. Because Power Automate's actions are, by their very nature, HTTP limited, it means when passing data to and from HTTP located data sources, it will never be as capable as Azure Data Factory. Data Factory can perform the ETL and integration activities without passing data to and from different HTTP locations. Here are some of the limitations of Power Automate when it comes to handling rows of data. In this project, I use Data Lake stored data and Data Factory to do the transforming tasks. Power Automate is used only after the data has been cut down, also known as chunked, to within its size limits. Because I'm dealing with big data here, in this case up to 2.7 million rows, looping through so many rows, Power Automate simply cannot cope, even when the flow owner has the most expensive license. So let's have a look at the solution diagram. The process starts with the file being uploaded to the required storage container. This can be done manually through the Azure portal itself, or via the Storage Explorer, or indeed by other automated methods. When the file arrives, a Data Factory pipeline is triggered, which splits that large file into files of 40,000 rows long. Those chunk files are created in a folder called Chunked. Once the chunking process is finished, a text file is updated to include a list of the names of those newly created chunk files. This is used to create the location string of those chunk files. Once the text file has been updated, a Power Automate flow is triggered, which then loops through each of the chunk files, passing their contents, that is, their data, into an Office script. That Office script outputs the data into a new worksheet for each chunk file. So let's have a look at the structure I've set up in the storage account. So I've called it SA chunking. As you can see here, I have one container. I've called it SA chunking container. And within the container, I have one folder and two files. And within the folder, I have another folder called chunked. And within the uploaded files folder is where the files, the large files to be chunked, get uploaded to. And we can see here I have uploaded this file, which is 13 megabytes, and a larger one, which is around 70 megabytes here. It's got 2.7 million rows. So within the chunked folder, we can see we have the result of the chunking process, and we have here 8 chunked files that each one is 40,000 rows in size. And you can see by the naming convention here, it's FR sales. So that is the FR sales file has been chunked. So if we go back up a level, we can see we have 2 text files here. Now, these are used for creating the list of chunked files. So if you remember the chunked files, we have 8 of them. named as that. And then if we go into the sync text file and we edit it, we can see the contents of that file. And we can see that we have here in JSON format the names of those 8 files here with their. So let's have a look at the Data Factory part of the project. So as we can see here, we have one pipeline. We have some data sets here. If we open that up, we can see no data flows, no Power Queries. So let's have a look at the pipeline itself and see what we're doing. So if we move it across so we can see everything. When a large file is uploaded to the uploaded files folder within the storage account container, the Data Factory pipeline here is triggered. And this is done by creating a trigger here. So let's have a look at the trigger. We can see it's of type storage events. So when something happens in the storage event, the trigger fires and starts the pipeline. So let's have a look. We've got one parameter in it. So let's have a look what the parameter is. So we've named the parameter uploaded file name. And we can see here that the value of the parameter is dynamic, and it's taking it from the outputs of the trigger, and it's the file name. So when we upload a file, we're actually getting the file name, and we're assigning it to the parameter with this name. So let's have a look at the trigger itself. So I put a description, a name from the Azure subscription, the storage account name, the container name, and then also the folder name and where the trigger actually happens. And we're looking for CSV files. So the first step is a delete. So if we select the source tab, we can see that we're deleting the files within the dataset chunked, and chunked is the folder within the data storage account of the chunked files. So after that's completed, we then copy data. So that's the source is going to be the file from the uploaded folder. That's the file that we wish to chunk. If we have a look at some of the other settings here, and then in the sync, we're moving the files into chunked, but what's important here is that the max rows per file has been set at 40,000. So what that does is chunk the uploaded file into separate files of maximum size 40,000. And the mapping, there's no mapping going on there. So let's have a look at the next action. So that's get metadata. So if we have a look at the settings here, we can see that it's getting the metadata from the chunked folder, and the particular argument is child items. So what it's doing is obtaining the list of items within that data set. And because that data set is a folder, the child items setting will return the items, that is folders and files, within that folder. So the next action is a variable. So we're creating a variable called varlist files. We're setting it to the metadata value that we'd previously just obtained. So this variable will now be used in the following action, which is copy data. Let's have a look at the settings. Got nothing of particular interest in the general, but in source, we're taking the data set to be a text file. So that's an empty text file. Let's have a look at that text file, shall we? So in our data storage, if we go to this level, and it's this file is the empty text file. So let's have a look. at this file and we have a look at the inside of it, we can see it's got one column, it's a CSV, one column with one row, and we've got a random value there in the row 1. So let's leave that as is. Now the sync is where we're going to be putting in the list of chunked files. So if we go back to the Data Factory, so we have the source here, and that's the one row, one column text file, CSV. So what we can see here, we've added in the source an additional column setting, and we've called it list files. You can call it whatever you want, but we're assigning the value of the variable, which is the list of files. Now the list of files is in JSON format, so we're converting that to string, and then we're assigning it to the column in the CSV file. So in the sync, we have the data set, which is called delimited text2. Now that is the other text file at that level. So let's have a look at that. So that's this file. Okay, so that currently has only one field. It's exactly the same as this one. But if we go back to Data Factory, so and then we go to the mapping setting, we can see here we're using the additional column that we added from the sync. It's assigning it, we're selecting the, well, that's its name. The additional column was called list files. It's a string type. Then we're mapping it to list files column within the sync. So let's have a look at the text file itself and see what's going on. So we can see after one run of the pipeline, the Data Factory, we can see what's happened here. We have our column, which is called list files, and then we have the value that's been mapped to that column, and you see it's in JSON format. And what we have here is the names of each chunked file. It's appended with the number 1 automatically, number 2, so on, 3. So that is what's happening here. Now, this text file now has JSON in it, and that is going to be used in the subsequent Power Automate flow. We have a look at the pipe run, a recent one. So we can see that these are all the actions. We have our delete, we have the copy. So that what that's doing is just moving the file and then splitting it and chunking it. So we're getting the metadata here. We've got a list of files. So let's see what's happening here. So here we've got the list of files being generated. And then in the create file list, again, we can see that it's been mapped into the subsequent text file. So let's now have a look at the Power Automate side of the project. So once the Data Factory pipeline is run, it generates a change in that text file we saw. It writes the list of files in JSON format to that text file. So in the flow, let's have a look. We can see that it's triggered when a file is modified in a blob, and that file is within that container. We get the name of the file, or the list of files that have been changed within the container, but the critical thing is that we test the name of the file. Here we get the name, and if the name of the file that's been modified within that blob is equal to chunked file name list sync, which is the second file, Then we run the flow. So what this means is when we're creating the chunked files, splitting the files as part of the Data Factory pipeline, we are actually creating or modifying files, and this routine, this flow will actually trigger, but it won't run anything past this point because the condition fails. So assuming that the condition is true, what we do here is we're getting the contents of the sync text file, and as we know, that is the list of chunked files in JSON format. So what we do now is we simply take that file and put it into a compose. This has to be done to convert it into the right format because it's in binary, and this, I believe, changes it into string or something similar. So here we go through a series of cutting, slicing, dicing, as you will, of the text files to remove the field name and the quotation marks from the front and the end of that text file. And so what we're left with is a clean JSON file, which we can then parse using this action. So if we past here, see there's the schema for it. So now that we've got a clean JSON file, we can then take the actual JSON itself. This is just a standard sort of checking message there that I can see that the actual names of the files. So we're getting the blob here. So here we're getting each file name from the JSON itself, and we can see we're using item name at the end there. So the item is the JSON file itself, and it's the body of the JSON file, so that's why we're saying the item. Then in the compose, we're just converting that again into the string format, which is standard for Power Automate. It can't use blobs without it being converted by this compose action. And then from the compose, which we have the file name, we run the script against each file. So we're using the chunking XLSX file. The script is called import CSV as param, and the input parameter is the contents of each of the chunked file. So we're actually passing the entire contents of the CSV file into the script. This can only be done if the size is small enough, not only for Power Automate to cope with, but also for the script to cope with. So as we can see, that runs, and that is the final action. Now, because it's in a loop, it will of course repeat for each chunked file. As we can see, that ran successfully previously, and it took around 5 minutes. I think it's around 300,000 rows for this particular example. So let's have a look at the script and see what's going on. So here we can see the result of the Data Factory pipeline and the flow. We can see the data has been imported fine into the workbook. So let's have a look at the script. So this is the script here that I've been using. Let's increase the size of things so we can see what's going on. So I've put here some sample data when I was testing. I've obviously commented this out. So what we can see here on the first line is the two parameters, the standard workbook one, but we also have the input parameter, and I've made it a string. So literally the blob's coming in, the CSV blob is coming in as one large string. There is a maximum size there. I believe the blobs themselves were only about 2 megabytes each. and that was starting, I think, approaching the limit. I think the limit's about 2.1. Certainly that's what I found in my experiments. So let's go further on in the script and see what's going on here. So after the sample input, we have declaring some variables. So this first section right up to about line 25 is just creating a new worksheet every time the script is run, and it's assigning the name of the worksheet to be just the current date and time, something like that. So if we move on, we're declaring another variable here. This time we're taking the input and then splitting it, that is putting it into an array based on the delimiter of a new line and carriage return. And as you know, CSVs have this at the end of their lines. So this creates an array of rows from the CSV. So we know we have 40,000 rows approximately. So this new array will have 40,000 rows. So here we're taking the first row of that array and we're splitting it by comma. Now the reason we're doing that is because we're creating a table, and as you can see here, the first row it contains the column headers. So what we do here is find the length of that first row, and then we build the table and assign the length of that table, that is the number of columns in that table, to equal the length row variable. Later on we can see we're actually doing that here by adding a table. We've built the address for that new table based on those previous variables that we created. And we're changing the style of the table here to make it obvious that it's a table. So now what we're doing here is we're declaring the variable rows, and this is done in this format, string boolean number, because we're then going to be using it within this for loop method, and we need to declare it in that format. So we're finding the length of the array, call it len input array. We are then declaring row array in the same format. This time it's one dimensional. The previous one was two dimensional. The row array is simply one row, but rows is the entire array. And we'll see why that is the case next. So what we have here is the loop itself. Now within the large array, we have each row, and each row is called repo, and we're splitting each row by comma and then assigning that to an array variable here called row array, hence the reason to declare it earlier as one-dimensional array. So now we add that one-dimensional array row to the rows array that we're now building. So now that we have the variables declared, we then loop through each row of that array, adding it to the rows array. Rows array itself will be added to a range, result range, which is resized or its dimensions are the size of the input array. Later on we've auto-fit the columns so that we can see what's going on. We have some error handling here. So in case the data set's too large. So let's upload a file and see the process in action. The file I'm uploading here is called frsales.csv, and it's around 300,000 rows. So the file has uploaded. So let's go to the pipeline and see the trigger action itself. So you can see the pipeline has started, the status is in progress. And the pipeline has finished. So going into the chunked folder, we can see the chunked files. Let's see what's happened with the flow. It's still running. And it's finished in around 1.5 minutes. So let's go to the chunking.xlsx file to see the output. You can, if you wish, modify the Office script to append each chunked input to the end of the previous chunk. But given the row limit in Excel worksheets online is 1 million rows, this will fail for our second upload file of 2.7 million rows. You can also amend the Office script to overwrite any existing table with the newly inputted chunk data, and indeed doing that would in effect create a refresh process. Here I am running a contents page creation macro. We can see that we can navigate to each of the tables created. After the 2.7 million row file was uploaded, as shown here, we could see in the chunked folder, it split into, I think it was 271 files, and I'm just scrolling through them here. After having uploaded this 70 megabyte file that contains 2.7 million rows of data in around approximately 8 columns wide, the pipeline itself generated 271 files, each with 10,000 rows. The script ran against each one of those files. Here is the result. So we've got a list of the worksheets here, which you can see there's 275 or 3, something like that. And then there's a list of the tables. We have 272, and this will include some of the other tables actually on the contents page as well. Additionally, you can add a Dropbox trigger to the flow so that when you or a client drops a file into a shared Dropbox, the file will get transferred into Azure Data Lake and thus trigger the Data Factory pipeline. There is a 50 megabyte limit on the Power Automate Dropbox trigger. Thanks for watching my video. Check out my business website too.